Going live. Okay, fingers crossed. This is the first time I've done a joint stream through Zoom, as I say. So hopefully that's working and we're all okay. Excellent. So this is fellow YouTuber Thomachi, who some people may be aware of. I linked through to one of your videos looking at the What Price Glory Central Europe battle dress, which is excellent. And we're just going to have a bit of a chat, really. I think there's nothing particularly on an agenda or anything like that. But I know you wanted to start with an anecdote about British troops in Norway in 1940, which I'm interested in hearing. So hopefully the watchers are as well. So fire away. I've been waiting and been interested to hear about this.
Okay, so when in 1940, when the war broke out in Norway, my grandfather was just a small child living on a farm in a very rural place in northern Norway. So, and I don't know, he doesn't remember the date, but he does remember the event where they lived in this valley, and one day a platoon of British troops came marching down, and they were on their way south to defend this other valley. And they were quite tired, so they stopped at the farm to have a rest from that stuff. And so obviously his parents didn't know much English, but they did understand one thing that the British troops requested, and they asked for tea.
Of course, yes.
Obviously, they asked for tea, which they got tea, not proper like English style tea, but like tea made from I don't know the English name, but kind of a it looks a bit like a fern kind of.
Right, got you. That is what is the common tea over in Norway, presumably. Is that what you guys drink in place of black tea, or
not anymore?
Not anymore.
So normal kind of fruit tea is more common nowadays, but that was the thing back then.
Yes. Well, I'm sure they were glad of a hot drink anyway, regardless. Yeah. But no, that's a lovely little story. I like that. And what else would a British soldier ask for but tea? Yeah, absolutely fitting. And obviously, as some people may have seen from your channel, you're getting together, obviously Norwegian, well, Second World War uniform, but obviously certain elements of it are British because it's the free forces, you know, the forces after the invasion and so forth. So a lot of the uniform and so forth is British, which is very interesting. And that you've covered some of that on your channel as well, which I've enjoyed watching.
So I do have most of the kit, but it's just mostly the small stuff. So,
yes.
Pocket fillers, and kind of, yeah, as I said, small stuff. So I need the gas cape, for example. And,
oh yes, of course, yeah.
Stuff like that, which I just haven't had the time to get.
The ones we use are What Price Glory, which we've found are very good. You just have to take the paint off the buttons, the snaps. You just have to take the paint off those, and they're a really good reproduction. Yeah. So they're the ones we use. Yeah, is there much of a reenacting scene over in Norway, or is it relatively small over there?
It's relatively small, and it doesn't really help that I live in such a small place far up north.
Yes.
So the only reenactment groups around here are where I live are like Viking stuff. There's also one group reenacting early 1800s kind of Danish Norwegian artillery. So.
Yes. Interesting.
So I do know there are groups down south that does more in Second World War immediately after. But I haven't found that they are very open and welcoming. So we kind of need to gain their trust.
Yes, you can show your kit is correct and your knowledge and so forth. But that can be a bit daunting for. I know certainly for over here, some groups can be a bit daunting for people joining. But it's interesting to hear. the cliquiness. It's interesting to hear that the cliquiness, as we would call it, but that attitude of, as you say, not necessarily trusting a newbie straight away. It's common throughout reenacting. That happens over here as well, most definitely. So yeah. And obviously I need to say a thank you to you again, because you've helped me with some of the Norwegian kit for my collection as well, particularly that used by the Royal Marines, of course, who were involved in Arctic warfare training and ended up using. I actually have the cap. Actually, come to think of it, I have the cap right here. So with the Home Guard badge on.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
And that is the Home Guard badge, isn't it, on the front there with the HV?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
The Home Guard, which I was actually a part of for a little while.
I was going to say, because you served in the Home Guard, didn't you? I know you've said of using the kit that you've talked about in your videos.
Yes, but I think I need to say that I wasn't in the main force. I was kind of in the what would be the equivalent of the cadets.
Ah, right. Yes. Okay.
But we did do quite a lot of field craft and proper military stuff. We just didn't have a lot of funding, so we used like 40-year-old kit.
Yes.
So I have a lot of field experience with 1970s, 1980s stuff.
Yes, which is interesting in and of itself, in that you've got the experience using the older kit, which I've been really enjoying your videos looking at that, because it's that weird mix of American design. I'm always interested when a country takes something from another country's military, be it web equipment, be it uniform or whatever, and then they modify it slightly for their own use and manufacture, and the kit you've been looking at really fits that bill. It certainly is very interesting to me from that point of view. So I've enjoyed your recent videos looking at the web gear and stuff like that. That's been really good.
Thank you. It's not a topic that there's a lot of reference
No.
for. So a lot of it is just looking at photos. That's the as you probably know, it's the prime source of any putting together any impression.
Yes. Yeah. It's as I say, it's interesting to see how the stuff was modified, and also knowing about the Norgy shirt, or Norge shirt as everyone calls it, but the M71, and that then being copied. It's interesting to see the rest of the uniform that went with it in Norwegian service, as opposed to just this shirt that everyone copied, which again is interesting. I find it interesting when a particular bit of military kit or uniform is brought out, and then everyone goes, "Oh, wow, this is great," and every military basically copies it. So, which obviously I know. I think people I've spoken to who are in, the Irish Army, and obviously we know the British Army made their own version, and the French made their own version, and yeah, it's interesting. But it's a very good design, so I can see why I can see why that happened.
Yeah, it's very if not ergonomic, it's very hard wearing.
Yes, yeah, and for the time, it's quite. Everyone else is just using wool shirts that button up, and this has a zip, and the flat. As you say, it's like a terry, what we call a terry towel, but the towel almost like a towel texture to the lining to catch the air and give you that insulating layer. It's a really very comfortable as well, certainly compared to British issue shirts of the time, which is like wearing a pan scourer, something for cleaning a frying pan. It's terrible. The wool.
I haven't heard a lot of good things about British shirts from
No,
that time.
the World War II ones are actually not too bad because they're pure wool, and the same goes for the immediate post-war period, the 50s and 60s. They're made of pure wool, but then in the 70s they make them of a wool nylon mix, and the minute you get those sort of plastic fibers in there with the wool, it just becomes horrible. And it's not great with sweat and everything else building up. They aren't very pleasant to wear. The wool mix ones. So that's another reason I think the Norgy shirts were, the M71, and then the copy of it that the British Army actually ended up making were very, very popular, as they were much nicer than the shirts on issue at the time. But that's been the bane of the British soldiers' existence. There's always some deficiency in uniform or something that they can complain about. But yeah,
absolutely.
in your early stuff, I think you were saying, did Norway post World War II use British web gear and stuff prior to going over to American kit, or did they just use a mix of all sorts of?
So the main kind of if you just look at the army,
Yeah.
the army used yes, they used mostly pattern 37 webbing from 1945 until the early 1950s when US stuff was phased in. So most of the British stuff were just sold back to the British.
Right. Okay.
And, but some say that you can see, say, particularly good film of the a promotion film for the Home Guard from 1960, where the almost everyone is running around in British battle dress,
Yes.
wartime battle dress, or American wartime, HPT uniforms, and most of them use pattern 37 webbing, but mostly just the belt, and because most of them were equipped with German Kar 98K rifles.
Yes.
They had the German leather pouches as well.
Yeah,
So
I've seen that in one of your videos. As you say, they will fit, but it's an odd combination.
yeah,
It certainly
yeah,
looks strange, to say the least.
that's for sure. But it works.
Mm.
Norway was one of the poorest countries in Europe up until the 70s. So
Yeah, make do with what they've got, basically. Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. That's a reason, obviously, post but after the end of the Second World War, I think that's a major thing of why so many European countries do adopt copies of US and British equipment. Is one, they don't have a lot of money to develop their own new stuff, and two, there's buckets of this stuff. There's warehouses full of this kit, and obviously the US in particular don't want to ship it all back to the USA. So a lot of
Yeah,
it is sold off directly from the depots and the warehouses that have been set up in Europe for the US Army. Because the occupation forces within a few years were nothing compared to the army that was, the US had put into the field, and they have all this equipment over in Europe. They don't want to take it back. Same with vehicles to a degree as well. You know,
yeah, yeah,
so it was a very cheap source of kit and uniform and so on for many European countries. But it is interesting that it influenced so much of the post-war kit that various countries then introduced later on, as you were looking at obviously Norway's later web equipment that was adapted a bit, and the copy of the belt and so forth that was made in country, rather than and as well as using the US kit, making copies of it was also very common as well. As I say, I've really enjoyed, just say that here as well, I've really enjoyed your recent videos looking at that stuff and the M71 uniform and everything. So please carry on doing what you're doing. It's very interesting looking at other countries' militaria as well as the stuff I focus on collecting. So it's good
yeah.
stuff.
Well, I'll keep going as long as the collection keeps growing.
Yes,
So
yes,
and there's obviously stuff that when talking about a particular piece of kit or uniform, there's often like uh, uh, accessories or stuff
mm,
that goes along with it that you'd like to have to show. Okay, so this is why they did this, or why the
yes,
is made like that, or so on. So I do have some stuff that I'm excited to make videos of, but I just want to get that complete
yes.
picture.
Absolutely. Yeah, it'll be really good to see. And what sort of first made you decide to start making YouTube videos? I mean, it's kind of an odd question perhaps, but what inspired you to start on YouTube with your military videos?
Basically, just watching videos like you and Devin
Mm,
and some smaller guys that uh, I don't remember the name of right now, and also reading some blog pages that were set up
yes.
for stuff. I just uh, uh, reading and watching and learning. really. But it made me want to share my knowledge, because there are
Yes,
some things that feel that I have knowledge that I can share with people. So,
definitely. So yeah, well, as you say, there's precious little out there about, you know, Norwegian Cold War kit in particular. I mean, I think that's the thing, is a lot of people know about sort of the Second World War and maybe immediately after in some instances, but there's a lot less out there on what everyone was using during the Cold War, and it's a very interesting time period, or I think so anyway. And to see, you know, all the various different European countries and what they were fielding at the time in terms of kit and equipment and so forth is interesting to me anyway. As I say, I've enjoyed watching your stuff from that point of view. As much as it's not something I would collect myself, I can enjoy your collection through your videos, which is a good way of doing it, you know. But I'm the same. It was, for me, it was wanting to share information, and I enjoy doing it, you know. So yeah, it's
yeah,
it's good.
I did make a horrible video a long time ago, back when I was in the home guard, when I still had the equipment. Oh, I can make a video about a complete kit from the 1980s. So I made one, but I wasn't happy with it because, well, first of all, there was copyrighted music in it. So,
Yes,
and second
YouTube
of all,
don't like that.
yeah, and second of all, I didn't have the confidence to talk on camera, so I wasn't happy with it, so I took it down. And yeah,
I look back at some of my early stuff and cringe, I have to say. I will be replacing some of my older videos with updated versions when I
yeah,
have time, because yeah, but that's practice and just getting used to it, I think. But
yeah.
yeah,
And that's the curse of the content creator, that you never be happy with the things you made.
yeah, that's certainly true. There's always things I look at and think I could have done that slightly differently, but yeah, slight improvements here, bits and pieces, but it's an upward hill. I think things get better. You know, videos are getting better as they go along. But
Yeah.
did you have any projects in the works? Any specific videos you're thinking of, or is that a secret?
Not really a secret, but uh, I am planning on of course, the Norwegian soldier in exile in 1942 or something.
Hmm.
Um, but as I said, they're just those two small pieces that I made. So, but I'm also kind of building on the same kind of kit with mattress and pattern 37 webbing is
Yes.
immediately immediately after the Second World War, in the occupation of Germany. So Norway basically sent a brigade of troops into the British occupation zone,
Yes.
and so that's basically it.
That'd be
Uh,
interesting to
because,
see.
because there's a lot of things are very similar to the World War II stuff, but some things are a bit different. Like, for example, uh, the like the sergeant's chevrons, and corporal and lance corporal. But the Norway decided that they kind of wanted to stick a bit out from British troops, so they
Yes.
reversed them and flipped them upside down.
Ah, right, like almost like American stripes.
Yes, like
Yeah.
American. So that's one of the things, and they also used I forget the name of the British unit that Norway used insignia, but they were made in Norway.
Ah, right. Okay.
So they don't really follow they follow the British pattern, but they're not identical to the British pattern.
Got you. Yes. So, well, it'd be the British Occupation Forces, Germany, I think it was, or I can't remember what the name is, but there was a specific. Are you thinking of the shield with the sword in the centre?
Um,
No.
uh, that one is appropriate, but I'm thinking of the uh, what in British terms would be the black square with the white Y.
Oh yes, I know what you mean. Yeah, so yeah,
The
but they
Norwegian
and
one,
Norwegian copy of, but it's as you say, it's specific, so it's slightly different. That's interesting
yeah,
though. I wasn't aware of that brigade, so that's interest. That's news to me. I'll be very interested to see the video on that when you get around to making it. That'll be very
yeah.
interesting.
And one of the interesting things is that Norway got British pattern 46 and 49 battle dress as well.
Ah, right. Okay. Interesting.
So I'm wanting to pick up a set of that. So
Yes.
yeah,
The original 49 is easy to find still, relatively easy to find, even in larger sizes. But 46 pattern is a bit more tricky.
okay.
There is an interim pattern as well called 47 pattern. Do you know about 47 pattern? They may have had that. They
Yes, I
may have
know
had
about
that
it,
as well.
but I'm not intimately familiar with all the.
Okay, because they may have had that as well. It's basically 49 pattern, but the collar is slightly different. It's worn open, but instead of being that sort of V-shaped notch cut out in the collar, it's more of a stepped collar, so it doesn't have that V shape. I'll make a video on one at some point. I would show you, but I don't have one here, unfortunately, right now. Things are in storage for moving, but it just has a slightly differently shaped collar. Really, is the main difference, and the trousers are similar, but I think the adjusters are on the other way around or something like that. Off the top of my head, I can't remember, but the trousers, but it's something along those lines. They went through why Britain went through three different patterns of post-war battle dress in quick succession. I don't know, because we had so much wartime stuff. Why they changed it, I don't know, but they did for some reason. Someone trying to keep people employed after the war, I think, possibly in a design department. But no, the original, because 46 you can still button it up to the collar. But it's interesting. The whole reason for it, of course, is that there was a big push for British soldiers to be able to wear a shirt and tie,
Yeah,
because the navy the navy when you got to be a petty officer, or if you were a rating not dressed as a seaman, that is to say not wearing the square rig uniform, you wore a shirt and tie, and obviously the RAF, all of the RAF wore shirt and tie, and there was sort of a pressure of why are our soldiers not wearing, why are they not permitted to wear a shirt and tie? And then of course they were permitted to late in the war, so they came up with these new designs that better worked with wearing a shirt and tie. So
yeah,
that's really
yeah.
what drove it, I think. But then of course 49 is not actually very good as a field uniform, because you can't really button it. You can, there is a button, but you can't really button it all the way up to the collar and keep the heat in. So yeah,
Yeah, that's the thing. It's all compromises. So,
exactly. It's not as good as a field uniform, but hey ho.
yeah,
Um,
but one of the I read a book that was it was made by a guy who was in the exile forces in Britain, and he tells that very early on when they started getting battle dress, they would sneak off down to the pub with a
mm,
open collar and shirt and tie stuff.
yes, it,
So yeah,
it does help smarten it up a bit. I mean, battle dress is not a smart uniform. That's one of my grandfather was in the 50s, and particularly he was in Korea just after hostilities had ended. Well, just after the ceasefire, which is still in place. But
yeah,
he remembers being, and in Germany as well, he remembers being very put out at how smart the American uniform was and how they had to wear battle dress, because in the 60s they did introduce a new service dress for the British Army, a tunic, trousers with a shirt and tie, to try and, obviously, national service came to an end, so they had to encourage volunteers to join, so they needed a
yeah,
smarter uniform. But he wore battle dress through his entire stint in the army, and he was not happy with he wasn't happy with that uniform at all, which is
oh,
understandable, because you compare it to the US uniform of the period, and even some European armies, it was awful. But
yeah,
that's because we had a big national service army, and they didn't want to, I think, waste money on equipping national servicemen with a nice smart uniform, and they didn't need to encourage people to join, really, because they had a big national service, pool of national servicemen to draw on as well. So yeah,
yeah.
It's amazing what they'll do when they finally need to encourage people to join again after all that time. The changes
Yeah.
that were made. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So it's funny you said that your grandfather wasn't very happy with battle dress, because when my grandfather eventually joined the army and went into the officer candidate school, they before they graduated, so to say, they used battle dress, but they didn't use British battle dress. They used kind of a local variant that had the open thingies, and and he said that people didn't like them because they had the button, obviously buttoned the blouse, the trousers,
Yes.
and you had to put like weights in the legs to get a nice straight leg, and it was made from a very itchy and bad wool, so everyone just called it the brown cheese.
Yes, I was going to say a lot. Yeah, it's a faff to deal with battle dress, as well as it not being particularly smart. It's also, as you say, putting it on with the buttons through the back and everything. Of course, it's based on 1930s skiing clothing. That's where that originates from. Of course, is that 1930s ski suits, which I'm sure were very practical for the time, but by the 50s, it's really, I suppose we had introduced combat uniform by that point, but only to a limited degree. It wasn't a standard issue. But anyway, talking about trouser weights, a little anecdote of my own here from a fellow collector. Quite a few years ago now, bought a set of trouser weights, which were what it felt like when they bought them was lead weights sewn into a cotton tube. So almost, they felt like fishing weights almost inside a piece of cotton, and each one stitched off. And they were feeling them. They bought them just having looked at them and got them home. I may be paraphrasing this slightly, but this is the gist of the story. And they suddenly had a bit more of a look at them and inspect them. These feel like handgun rounds.
Oh.
And they opened them up. They opened up one of these tubes, undid the stitching, and they were live 38 revolver rounds. Just bashing together, and they were old. They were old ones, so who knows how stable they were or whatever. But they were live 38 rounds, so obviously they disposed of them. But they bought them just thinking they were lead weights, in a tube, period trouser weights. For those in the chat who may not know, when you're wearing battle dress and you wear anklets or puttees, where it blouses round at the top, it wasn't uncommon to wear weights in that to hold it down so that it formed a nice crease all the way around. Certainly it was very common post-war to do that, to get a nice, well, as smart as possible. There's a limit to the smartness you can achieve with battle dress, but as smart as possible anyway. Yes. And I'm going to say, we've talked about army uniform and stuff. You're moving into naval kit now as well, which is interesting.
Yeah. So my interest in navy uniforms is a bit recent, but it kind of goes back to the home guard years, because I was in the Navy home guard.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So we didn't get like the classic sailor outfit, but we did get a navy blue variant of the standard uniform that we would wear on special occasions.
Right. Okay.
So and actually, I have it right here. Not the uniform, but I have my beret.
There we go. Yes.
So this may look a bit purple on the camera, but it's just been used for years and years and years. So
very smart.
Yeah, it's actually 3 sizes too small, but that's the only thing I can get. So
it's going to say it molded over. It doesn't, shaped like that. It doesn't look too bad. No, that's good. And is that the home guard cap badge, the standard home guard cap badge, but on the navy? Or did you have is that a specific cap badge to your unit? There we
go. So it's a standard. It's the King's monogram.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is standard on Army and Air Force uniforms. berets.
Mhm.
And the Navy uses the regular Navy uses a special kind of anchor. And the higher up in the ranks you go, the more elaborate the
Yes.
refit and so on. But the Home Guard Navy uses these
Gotcha.
standard ones.
Yeah.
So that's that story.
And is the color of the beret the blue beret? That's for the Naval Home Guard specifically.
No, it's a standard Navy.
Right. Okay.
Beret. So
yeah, got you.
The basically the Norwegian Home Guard uses everything that the regular forces uses, but usually has some slight twist on it.
Yeah. Yes. And what I'm assuming, obviously, in that role, what would be in time of war? Would the Home Guard will be basically for national defence, whereas the army might be deployed outside Norwegian borders to fight. The Home Guard is for a, you serve in country basically as a home defence force. Is that the idea behind it?
Basically, yes. But to kind of the whole of Norwegian defense policy in after the Second World War and even before, but the was mainly defensive. So because we obviously don't have a whole lot of people in this country, and so you would have the main army would kind of form the main defense, and then the Home Guard would defend local kind of vital,
I see. Yes. Yeah.
vital things like power plants and so on. So
Understood. Yes. Point defence, which allows the army to be more flexible in its defence and move around more. And yeah, that makes it's a similar role to that which the Home Guard took on in Britain during the Second World War, guarding local infrastructure and so forth, which frees the army up to go and do, more mobile operations and things. So that sounds very similar.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is that the Norwegian military has since like the 1800s been a conscript army.
Oh right, yes,
so,
yes.
So everyone has their 1 year in the army, navy, or air force, and then there's a 50-50 chance of being put into the Home Guard afterwards, in which you will stay until you're 44 years old, unless you're an officer or have a special role.
Interesting. What's the reasoning behind the 50-50 split, and is anything taken into consideration in that, or is it just a pure numbers out of just random people to make up 50%? Or
it used to be very random, and you didn't have a lot to say of it. But now, if you say you don't really want to, you can usually get away with it,
right?
Unless there's a severe shortage in the place you're living, because it's very localized.
Yes. I was going to say, I could imagine there'd be enough people who'd be relatively willing to do it, to fulfill that role.
Yeah, because you really only have like a week a year, maybe.
Yeah,
that you're
just a refresher training. Yeah. Interesting. It's an interesting way of doing things. As I say, people talk about the idea of national service, or something of that nature coming back in the UK. It occasionally rears its head, but obviously it's not something we've really experimented with since the 60s, the early 60s, when the last national serviceman left the army. But it's a different setup. We have the tradition of having a volunteer army, of course, going right back to quite some time. I think early 1700s, late 1600s. I think the Royal Army, when it was reformed, obviously after we had our little civil war, I think the army formed by the king when he came back to the throne by Charles II, I think that was a volunteer army at that point. Obviously, prior to that, we just formed armies whenever we needed them. The nobles, the nobles just grabbed people whenever they needed them, basically, and said, "Right,
come on, boys,
exactly, yeah,
let's do this."
But no, do you know anything? Have you heard that? Obviously, we had a Home Guard very briefly after World War II as well. They reformed the Home Guard in the 50s, which is quite an interesting little episode.
Yeah, because you did a an event where you.
That's right. Yes, I've got. I'm making a video. Spoiler alert for everyone. I'm making a video looking at that a little bit more detail and separate from it because not everyone's necessarily watched the event, the video looking at the event. But yeah, I've always said it's quite interesting. It was Churchill's second term as prime minister, and
Yeah, that's right.
suddenly the Home Guard reappears, and you think, yeah, I know why. Of course, they're trying to recapture some of the the farcical reason for it was the idea of a load of Soviet paratroopers dropping on the UK after but much as it had been German paratroopers during World War II, but I don't. The likelihood of that, even at the time, was recognised as being very, very unlikely, and I think mainly it was trying to recapture some of that World War II era. I don't know, national unity, national pulling together. I don't know. I think it was political mainly. It was. I don't think it was really justifiable given the situation at the time. But it's interesting. It's an interesting thing that it happened during Churchill's second term in office. Yeah, but obviously we did kind of have again in the 80s. We kind of had a similar to what you're saying for local defence. We had the I'm trying to remember the name, and I can't right now. But we had a similar situation. We had a similar setup of sort of a home guard organisation. It was generally drawn from ex British soldiers, ex serving members of the armed forces. But it's interesting, how different countries, deal with defence and so forth. And I suppose if you've got a tradition of a conscript, army or conscripted forces, then it just carries on. I guess it's just part of the nation's psyche. You just do it that way.
So we still have conscription, but it's very a very soft conscription. So basically, every man and woman when they turn 18, they get like a letter where they have to answer a few questions, and if they say they don't want to do it, they're usually let off the hook. So
interesting.
And they only take in like between 8 and 10,000 each year. So
yeah, so it's not necessary for everyone to agree to do it, basically, to fill out those numbers. I'm interested. It does. That sort of answers my question already, because I was going to ask about conscientious objectors, those who object based on religion or whatever, who might want to do some other kind of service. Is that an option, or they just don't?
So back in the day, you would, if you objected to going into the military, you would put in the civil defense.
Yes.
But the civil defense, kind of the last 20 years, have been really small and really. So not a lot of people get put into the civil defense to do their service.
Yes.
So,
well, I was going to say there's not so much need for it now as perhaps there was. Well, I don't know. Russia's playing some interesting games at the moment, so we'll see. But yeah. Oh dear. Yes. But no, it's again. I think that fits in with the post-Cold War wind down of a lot of European forces and civil defence and so forth. It's not seen as a priority these days in the same way, which is understandable. It died a death over here to a degree, even before the end of the Cold War, because they realised that if there was actually a full-on nuclear war, it wasn't actually going to help very many people. But obviously they could, the organisation wasn't just there for that sort of thing. It was more useful than that, but it was seen as a bit of a waste of time, I think, by a lot of people. But that's interesting in and of itself, all the post World War II civil defence, because obviously it grew up in a big way during the war, and then there's a huge amount. You've got radiation reconnaissance who go out with Geiger counters and measure the radiation and things like this, which I'm assuming your civil defence would have had something similar perhaps during the Cold War era.
But they would have special units for it, not just anyone who came through. So
yeah, in our instance, I know that I think it was, they probably picked people to a degree, but I think it was just, maybe Joe Bloggs down the road He's been trained to use a Geiger counter. Give him a set of denim battle dress uniform that can be thrown away when he comes back, and send him off in a Land Rover. Go and take some measurements. See what it wasn't quite that ad hoc, but it wasn't far off. Yeah, an interesting time.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
that's the good old bad old days.
Well, yes, indeed. I say interesting to look at from a historical point of view, but yeah. Thankfully, as we now know, it didn't come to anything. But the fear at the time was very real, and I can understand the fear. It's a horrific thought of war breaking out at that time period. But yeah, came close several times as well, of course. So it wasn't.
It's fun to look back on now, but probably not so much at the time.
No, I was going to say definitely not at the time, but yes. So getting back to your collecting briefly, is your collecting focused entirely on Norwegian kit, or are you aiming to collect other, or is it primarily looking at recreating Norwegian uniform and so forth, going back through time?
Yes, so mostly Norwegian stuff. Mostly because it's a lot of it is relatively cheap still and available. But I do also collect some Finnish stuff.
All right, okay.
I'm building up a Finnish World War II kit, so that's slowly coming together.
When that comes around, I look forward to seeing videos on that as well.
Yeah, so don't consider me as a prime source of Finnish World War II stuff, but I'll make videos on it.
No, it's interesting to see even from a casual, because it's not necessarily something I'm going to immerse myself in terms of learning all about it, but just seeing a video that gives you an outline of the kit and shows you what was in use at the time is interesting. So yeah,
and there's a lot of similarities between Norway and Finland at the time, because both were quite poor and had small populations and similar climates. So it's almost a bit funny to see kind of pictures of what a ideal soldier would be equipped with, but then you actually look at photos of soldiers in the field, and I just barely have enough equipment, like an extremely cheap leather belt with like a 40-year-old ammunition pouch in it. So
yes, an army on a shoestring, basically.
Yeah.
It's again, that's something people don't necessarily think about, is the fact that these armies were built up by countries which were, as you say, poor at the time, which makes it even more impressive how the Finns handled the Winter War with Russia. It's even more impressive when you think that they had a very limited budget for what they were doing. Yes, not like the comparatively lavishly equipped British Army, where by and large everyone was dressed as per they should, how they should be, and had the right kit and so forth. Yeah, and even more so the Americans. But it is interesting. Yes, yeah, it's again a very different experience as well, of as you were saying, sort of anecdotes you've heard from people and so forth of people on the continent compared to the experience in the UK, because I don't know if you've been to reenacting events over there and stuff, because you say most of the World War II stuff is further south than
so yes, it's mostly further south, and most of them not most of them, but some of them don't take it very seriously. So
right, because I was going to say, over here you tend to find 40s events, as they're often called, which is funny because of course World War II isn't just the 40s, it's 39 as well. But in fact, we said we went to an event once in full sort of 1939 kit, service dress, 1937 pattern, on it was a railway event. It was at a steam railway, so we were there as troops who were on the move. They were going to rejoin the units or whatever. And we said, actually, this is a 40s event, so we're being really farby because we're doing 1939. But anyway, the over here, I think because partly because the experience here during the war, obviously there was the Blitz and the bombing and everything, we weren't invaded. It has a very rose tinted view, whereas I think continental Europe have slightly more somber view of World War II. Over here, events, they tend to be a bit it's a pastiche. It's a very shallow view of what that time period was like, and it's all far too happy and glitzy and everything else. Whereas actually, it was a time of real hardship. But I've noticed on the continent, I think it's a little bit more somber in that regard because obviously a lot of nations were, well, in Western Europe. Obviously, Western Europe was essentially under Nazi rule, which is, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why World War II stuff isn't as common here, because most people have relatives or have met someone who have experienced something quite bad. So, so obviously, if you reenact the Vikings or Napoleonic Wars, there isn't as much of
there's that good disconnect there, but the memory, the bad memories run deeper in continental Europe as opposed to in the UK, where okay, there was the great loss of life in the Blitz and the bombing and everything, but that's very different to actually being invaded. And I think that's one of the reasons that the rose tinted view, the very almost cartoony view of World War II has prevailed. It's something that's quite annoying at reenacting events occasionally, but c'est la vie, that's how it is. But no, it's, as I say, that is interesting though to say that's perhaps why World War II reenacting isn't as popular or as common in Norway. Which is a shame because it would be nice to see the free forces. It would be nice to see the contribution to the war remembered in that way. But I can understand it not being.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about kind of softly trying to put together a group to do it, but as I said, I live in a quite not so popular population dense part of the country, so finding people around here who are willing to put in the money, time into it's rare.
I think you definitely need people with the interest first. It's almost trying to find people and get them interested is they need to be aware that the hobby exists, obviously, but I think you need people to make a group. You need people who are interested from the ground level. They've got into it with themselves in their own way. And then, it is difficult, though, as you say. I think the other thing as well is you end up with some people doing it for the wrong reason, which is, I'm going to sound very elitist here, which is terrible, but people who are doing it not necessarily for the historical interest, but purely because they like dressing up and stuff. And okay, sure, that's part of it as well, and liking that, I've got this uniform right is great, but having at least a good, a passing knowledge of the time period and what you're trying to recreate and the soldiers' experience as well. That's another thing is we've been to events and heard people telling all sorts of strange stories about how soldiers did things and so forth, and you think, that's not like any account I've ever heard, but and as you're saying, it's like those people who you mentioned who perhaps don't take it as seriously.
And I won't name the group or place where this happened, but I was just looking at pictures from a event where I had some vehicles and some stands and so on, and there were people who were dressed up as British paratroopers in the Second World War, and and first of all, the most of them were wearing modern sunglasses.
Right. Yes.
And second of all, most of them were wearing Norwegian modern combat boots.
Right. Okay.
With just the gaiters over it, but you can clearly see it. It's the wrong thing. And also, they're not wearing particularly good battle dress as well, and they didn't blanco their kit. And
that's a common one. Well, now Soldier of Fortune, of course, make pre KG3 dyed webbing, so you don't have to bother blancoing your 97 You're
Yeah,
blancoing your 37 pattern, which is just, yeah, it's not right. You know,
yeah.
okay, it
But,
saves you a bit of time, but it's not
yeah,
correct. You know, just spend a bit of time, buy the blanco, and do the job. You know,
yeah.
it's
But the good thing is that most of the Norwegian forces in
mm.
Britain didn't blanco there.
Right, okay. Well, that I was going to say
So
there are
I get,
instances where it's correct, but
yeah, so I get to get away with it.
yes, yeah.
But there are some photos of clearly blanco kits. So
Mm. Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Is not everyone who used 1937 pattern did bother using blanco. I don't believe the Irish did particularly. The Navy didn't really bother blancoing their webbing. Apart from you could use khaki blanco if stuff got mucky, but you were supposed to, use it bare. Otherwise, you only blancoed if it got dirty, to clean it up. But yeah, it's an odd one.
yeah,
That is a common reenactor thing where they should, in a situation where they should. But it's interesting to hear that British reenacting goes over there. I was going to ask is those who do World War II reenacting in Norway, what units do they use? Is it all American? Because that's very common as well, of course,
yeah,
as you find that.
uh,
Um,
yeah. It,
yeah.
American isn't very common, but German stuff is very common,
Yeah.
kind
Oh,
of
right. Okay.
relatively. So there are units, groups who portray, Norwegian who who join the SS and so on.
Really? All right. Okay.
So that's uh, just reading and watching them. They're clearly very uh, dedicated and interested in the history and all of that stuff. And it doesn't seem like they're interested for the wrong reasons, but it's still a
It's still slightly disconcerting. It's slightly,
yes, it's on a kind of a deep level because it's such a deeply rooted thing
yes.
uh, in a
Uh,
lot of occupied territories.
yeah.
Uh, more power to them, but I won't be joining anytime
No,
soon.
no, no, indeed. I have seen two things at British events which have made me like, was someone actually dressed as a British Free Corps because there were about 5 or 6, I think, British SS
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
recruited from.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've seen someone dressed as British Free Corps, which is, you know, such a niche thing that I thought they must be doing that for the wrong reasons because why else would they choose that one little section of people? I don't know. I didn't speak to them, so I can't say that for certain. But the other thing I saw was someone dressed as very badly dressed as a British Union of Fascists
okay.
member, which is obviously Oswald Mosley's pre-war fascist organisation with the lightning bolt armband. I saw that at an event once, which was again, that's really
Yeah,
that makes me wonder why they're doing it. But anyway, yeah, that surprises me though that there's and as I say, all power to them with the interest in the history and everything else. I'm sure the kit and everything is very well researched, but yeah, slightly uncomfortable thinking about that.
yeah.
Um,
But I think if you go into it with kind of keeping your distance from the kind of the ideas and the,
the
the
ideology, the politics of
yeah, if you
yeah,
kind of are self-aware, then you'll be fine.
yeah,
Because,
absolutely, yeah, no. As I say, I've talked about this with various people, and can say, at events where you have a unit who are recreating a specific military unit, and they're doing it correctly, and it's not got politics involved, then great, because it's important. Again, provided I think if you're doing that, it's you've got to look at the educational value of it, and
yeah,
this is what historically this is what this unit did, and this is the kit they had, and everything else. Um, yeah, it's as I say, just a personal level makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's certainly not something I would reenact
yeah.
myself.
So
But
yeah.
I mean, I'm technically half German, so
But
but
I
that,
also have
yeah,
some German in me
yeah,
going way back.
yeah, so yeah, it's a weird one. But anyway, it's some obviously the odd stuff I collect is I have got a bit of East German kit, but that's primarily as a kind of opposing forces situation. I'm planning a video, again, spoilers for those who are followers of the channel, but I'm planning a video comparing British kit and East German kit for the building of the Berlin Wall, because obviously the anniversary of that's coming up this year. So that'll be a video that's coming out in. I'm not sure quite when I'm going to upload that, because it specifically looks at troops a little bit later in the year. But anyway, or that's what I'd planned. We'll see. That's in the works anyway. But yeah, it's a funny old world, the reenacting world, I have to say. Yes,
Yep.
but no, it's normally, that's the thing, is it's normally American. I'd expected to hear that everyone reenacted Americans using copies of US kit from European countries, because that's what a lot of people did. I talked to a friend from Australia, and he was saying that over there, a lot of the reenacting events, you see Germans fighting Americans. Australia had their own theatre of war in the Pacific, but that isn't really. It is covered, but it's not covered as much. They don't cover their own. A lot of guys want to wear the German and the US kit, presumably, or just find that more interesting. Historically, I don't know, but it surprised me. It surprised me.
I think a lot of it has to do with movies and television, because
possibly so. Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure you felt the exact same thing is when you've done watching a really good show or movie, and it made an impression on you.
Yes.
Immediately you want to go out and buy. Oh, I want this.
Well, absolutely. Well, Band of Brothers did that, of course, with everyone going and buying US Airborne, US parachute kit. And I think to a certain degree, Saving Private Ryan did with Rangers as well. They got a lot of guys recreating US Rangers at that point. Yeah, I don't think the British have had a movie where it's inspired people to go out and buy British kit, but maybe one day.
So yesterday I rewatched the movie The King's Choice.
Oh yes, yeah.
Have you seen it?
I haven't, but I know of it. I need to.
Oh, you got to see it.
Yeah.
The costumes are so good for the most part. There are some oddities. For example, when they pick up a guy and he has rubber soles on his boots.
Oh, on his boots. Yes.
Yeah.
Am I right? Is that the movie with the scene of the Germans attacking up the fjord? And the naval, the coastal, because I've seen clips from it, and one of my favourites is the coastal guns firing and the torpedoes attack is beautiful scene. Really, it makes, just watching that standalone makes my skin prick. I get goosebumps from watching it. It's so well acted. But no, I need to watch the whole film. I've not seen.
Yeah, so that's quite early in the film, so you kind of get pumped for what's going on.
What's going on? Yeah.
Immediately when I watched it, I wanted to get one of those pre-war Norwegian uniforms
with the cappy and everything. It's
because you have the uniform that was most common for soldiers, were the M1914 uniform, which was quite good when it came out, and I do know that some of them were sent to Germany and to some other countries to kind of make an impression on them, because they.
Right.
But oh yes, so I want to get one of those, but they are getting a bit pricey, and they are not very common in bigger sizes, because I'm not particularly huge, but I do got very broad shoulders.
Broad shoulders, yes. I think you've mentioned that previously in a video.
Yeah, and a big head, so getting an original one is out of the question. And I know there are some who make reproductions, but I don't think they will make it to just anyone who comes along.
Right. Okay. Well, it can't hurt to ask. If you are in a position where you can buy, you have the funds available to buy one, then it can't. It can't hurt to ask.
Yeah. So I know a kind of a reenactment group that has some of those reproductions. So I'll sort of try to softly infiltrate them.
Yes. Hopefully they won't watch this video first and know what you're about. But yeah. But no, that would be good to see as well. The timeline of kit is always interesting for me to see how things have progressed, which is again one reason I like your video looking at the webbing, is showing how it changed over time, and that obviously with getting the early war kit together would be interesting to see. And then obviously now then looking at re-equip with British kit and equipment further down the line and so forth, that would be an interesting contrast, perhaps.
Yep.
But
so a interesting things to see right after the war would be obviously the Royal Guard. If you have you seen their parade uniform?
I haven't. No, actually, no. I'll have to.
So it's a very kind of late 1800s design with a tunic with a standing collar and
yes,
they actually have a bowler hat with a plume on it.
I know the hat. I've seen photos of the hats.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yes, yeah.
So, but immediately after the Second World War, they obviously the forces were expanding, and some of those uniforms had been used by collaboration forces during the war. And they are super expensive, so they didn't make any new ones for a while. Yeah. So you'll see a Royal Guardsman in British battle dress, and they'll use the old parade equipment with the parade hat and.
Interesting, but with battle dress. I'll have to have a look online for photos.
Yeah, I can send you some.
Yeah, no, that would be great. That's fascinating, though. What a combination.
Yeah, it looks
interesting.
Quite,
interesting
iconic.
to hear there was sort of a political element to that they'd been used by collaborators. That's an interesting one. That was part of the reason. I mean, obviously, I know, as you say, expense would have been as well, but it's interesting to hear that was part of it. Yeah,
I know the modern one for a complete set. They cost around 100,000 Norwegian kroners, which is about about 9,000 pounds, I think.
That's a lot of money for one man's uniform. Yeah. I don't know what the guards. I'm not sure what their red tunics and things are now, but I know they get a lot of retailoring and reissue and reuse. So, I mean, that's a Victorian uniform. The tunic essentially goes back to the 1850s, the mid 1850s. Is when our guards uniform, that's when it dates from, essentially, and they didn't really change it. Or the rest of the army were still wearing red, and they wore all different versions, but the guards basically stuck with that from the 1850s onwards, with small detail differences, like the collar is a slightly different shape and things like that. But otherwise, it's basically the same uniform as they were wearing in the late 1850s. So yeah, it's they wore the full kit on parade for a long time as well, and even in between the wars. And it's only really I forget exactly when it was, but they only went to just wearing the belt and the bayonet frog and everything after World War II, as I remember, or during the war, or just before. But yeah, they used to have sets of leather equipment, as you were saying, parade equipment to wear, even though everyone, the rest of the army and in the field, they wore modern equipment. They kept a lot of the leather stuff for use on parade. Yeah, it does look smart, but I kind of wish they'd go back to wearing sets of equipment rather than just the belts. But it might not look right with the modern rifle. That's the only problem.
Yeah, that's always the thing. So
I was talking to Devin about that on the stream. Is the modern the L85 is not a good rifle for parades, but never mind.
Yeah,
it's a shame, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they want them to make it clear that they're real soldiers, so they're carrying the proper issue rifle rather than a parade rifle. But
yes. It's the same with the Royal Guards. They have the drill unit use M1 Garrets.
Oh yes, yeah.
And that's their actual issue weapon. So if there was a war, they would run out into the field with M1 Garrets.
Wow, amazing! That's fantastic. Wow.
So it looks funny when they're on exercise and they have all the modern kit and the M1 Garret. So
that's very interesting.
They are not the guys who are protecting or parading around the palace. Those guys get actual service rifles, which is the HK416 at the moment.
Yeah.
And anyone who has handled a HK416 will know that the handguard is very sharp and full of rails. So pretty early on, they found that when they were doing rifle drills with the HK416, they would catch on the shoulder and rip open the tunic. So
yes.
So they had to make an effort to buy in rail covers.
Yes, yeah. Well, I was going to say obviously the SA-80 when it's being used for drill and so forth has a cover that goes over the front of the forestock. But yes, this is the problem: is when you're doing ceremonial things with kit that really is designed for use in the field. Well, I don't know if you could say that about the L85 in its early phase, but in its early form. But yeah, it's the problem when you're trying to do ceremonials with very practical kit that perhaps isn't quite as well set up for showy rifle drill and all sorts of things. But yes, the problems we have with having a modern military, doesn't look as nice anymore. Dear, but yes. Well, we've just gone over the hour. If it's all right with you, Tom, I think I'll call it there if that's all right with you. I've really enjoyed the chat. I've just got some bits and pieces I need to do this evening. Uni work, unfortunately, is still a thing. But it's been really good chatting. So we'll have to do something like this again at some point, and maybe I'll could get Devin in as well. Perhaps we could have a chat together or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good.
Fantastic. And it's
also sorry to the chat that we didn't look at the chat as much. I did glance down at it from time to time, but
yes, no, I sort of made a decision in this stream that it wouldn't really be possible to keep up with the chat and chat to you, and obviously it's a new setup for me as well doing it this way. So in the future, we'll have to set up and see if we can and have a look at some of the comments and so forth as well. One thing I will say, yes, I'll say hi to Ramsey. I'm glad the ration details have been useful. Ramsey certainly enjoyed doing all that research and has been very generous with making it available. So yes, but no, it's been really good. And I'll say bye for now, and obviously we'll have to catch up again at some point going forward. And I look forward to seeing your upcoming videos as well, as I say.
Yeah, I have one that will probably go on tomorrow. So
fantastic. I'll keep an eye out for that. I won't ask what it is because I'd like to have the surprise.
Yeah, that's. I won't tell. I won't tell.
Nice one. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll chat to you again at some point.
Yep.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.